afternoon. At the tone, Pacific Daylight Time will be 5, 4, and 30 seconds.
What? Oh my God, we're having an earthquake. Wait a minute. Hold on. Can you feel that? Yes, I sure can. Okay, this is interesting. There go the lights. Oh.
My name is Feinman, and I am currently the Dean of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at California State University, Monterey Bay.
Excellent. And I'm Kenneth Welcher. I am a real estate appraiser in Santa Cruz County. Although at the time of the earthquake, I was business loan officer at Santa Cruz Community Credit Union.
And I'm Jen, and we are here to talk about the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake. So thank you both for coming.
Thank you for doing this.
Can you start by talking about how long you've been in Santa Cruz?
Mm-hmm. You're gonna make me start. I can do that. We're good. We just didn't work these rules out ahead of time. I've lived here since December of 1977, and in various places around Santa Cruz for all that time.
And I've been here exactly 44 years.
Mm.
I came in 1975 after graduating high school to go to UCSC.
Great. Where did you come from?
LA.
Okay.
I escaped.
And you?
I came from Miami, Florida.
Oh boy.
Mm-hmm. From hurricanes to earthquakes.
Yeah. So can you tell us what you were doing before, during, and after the earthquake? Just give us the whole earthquake story.
Yes. So before the earthquake, I was sitting in a graduate seminar, the first seminar of this peer class. My cohort was a 1989 History of Consciousness Board, Theories and Methods introductory seminar. And so the group of us were I think there were about 16 or 18 of us, and only 2 of us were Californians. And some had come from international, and some were national, and none but the 2 of us were Californians. And that was a really awkward way to say all that. But we were sitting in the seminar, and Hayden White, who was one of the senior faculty who was retiring at that time, came to talk with us, and he had finished his comments with us by saying, so therefore history is dead. We had been talking about the sort of reconstruction of meaning and interpretation in history and other theoretical conversation, and he closed by saying history is dead. And then he left, and we were closing out the seminar for the afternoon, and the earthquake hit. And so all of us were a little bit stunned by the earthquake, by the context of his statement, and then the earthquake happening. We were in Kresge College in one of the upstairs classrooms, and those buildings are built onto the hillside, and they were rocking back and forth in the earthquake. And we all looked around the room. One of the faculty went and stood in the doorway to protect herself. And the students in the room who were not Californians were all in shock and didn't know what to do. We couldn't get either through or to the doorway because the one faculty was protecting herself. And the 2 of us that were Californians said, everybody get under the desks, because we were in a seminar room with a bunch of tables. So we all got under the desks, and then the earthquake stopped, and then she got out of the doorway, and we all went outside, and there were tons of people who had come out of the buildings and who were all on the sidewalk paths down the hill in the earthquake. And I knew that my son, who was turning 7 that very day, was in town with my mother, and that Kenny was downtown at the credit union, and all I wanted to do was get off the hill and figure out where everybody was. So I ran down to my car and started to drive down into town, and I could see the downtown court, from UCSC on the hill, I could see that the downtown, there was smoke, just tons of smoke. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know how Kenny is. I know that our son Ben, is at the Brant's 40 school at an after school program with my mother. I don't know if they're okay. I need to get there. And it took forever for me to get across the Broadway bridge because they hadn't shut the bridges down yet. It was early enough. And so I got across the bridge and got home and found Kenny.
Hours later. It took
2
hours.
2 hours later.
Yeah.
Thank you. See, we have to help each other tell stories. And found Kenny was there, and my mom and our son was there, and we ended up with my son's best friend because his mom had landed in San Jose at the airport and couldn't get over the hill. So we were all camped out in the house that was a mess, and my mom had been leaving at that same moment. She had been, at the moment of the earthquake, she had been leaving the school, the after school program with Ben, and they went to get in the car, and she had turned the key, and she thought there was something wrong with the car. So she said, Ben, get out of the car. There's something wrong with the car.
At the moment of the earthquake.
Right. And then she realized that the ground was shaking. So she said, Ben, get back in the car. So they jumped back in the car. And then when the earthquake stopped, because she was up on the hill, she was able to get to the house. So she got to the house, and they were waiting inside when each of us got there. And all the power was out all over town. And my father was in the hills in Corralito, SoCal Hills. And you know most of this story because you know who he was with.
Yeah,
he was a realtor at the time. He was a real estate broker, and he was taking this person out to see property.
Basketball player.
So they were out in
the
the hills on the literally the edge of the hillside on a road cut out in the hill. And the earthquake was happening, and the hill was rocking because he was not far from the epicenter. And who was the basketball player? Mark McNamara. So then they made it to our house. So we all convened at our house.
So I was at the credit union. It was 5 o'clock. I was finishing up, getting ready to go home. And everything started shaking. I grew up in California. It wasn't my first earthquake. I kind of thought earthquakes are fun. You get a little bit of shaking, and everyone goes ooh ah, and then that's it. Right. So, okay, it's shaking, and I'm doing my ooh ah, and that's supposed to be it. And everything's still shaking. And I'm like, okay, it's time for it to stop shaking. And everything is still shaking. I mean, I think it only shook for 30 seconds, maybe. Okay, but it seemed like a lot longer at the time. I mean, it just kept going on, and I thought, okay, stay put, it'll end in a second. And I realized then my office at the time, kind of like this, had these big plate glass windows all around it. And as I'm standing there in the office, I had this file cabinet, and there was a stapler and a 2-hole punch on top of the file cabinet. They, like Ghostbusters, come flying off the file cabinet in the shaking. Now, had they gone that direction, they would have just shattered the windows. Instead, they came toward me, and I went, I'm getting out of here. And I made a beeline to the back door and opened the back door, where the credit union was located at the time. It was right up against the river levee. And there was a parking lot. The back door opened onto a parking lot. And as I opened the back door, I remember seeing from the street all the way down the parking lot and up the river levee, the ground just split. And I watched this crack go down the parking lot and up the river levee. And then I could see the smoke. I mean, most of it was dust. Mm-hmm. It was more dust than smoke. You didn't know that at the time. But, and I just thought, okay, I've got to get home. And I managed to get home pretty quickly because I was not too far from, I don't remember where my car was, but I got in it and got home. And Ben and my mother-in-law were there, and Ben's friend, Andrew. I remember opening the door though, and our cat came racing out the front door.
Right.
And went underneath the front porch and just buried herself in the dirt.
Wow.
She didn't come out for a good day and a
Yeah.
half, 2 days.
Yeah, just wanted to be buried in the earth, you know. And I remember walking through the house, and we had this big wall of bookshelves that had all kinds of everything on it.
Books, ceramics.
Yeah, and everything had fallen from the bookshelf, and of course the books had broken all the ceramics and glass. And my first thought, once I saw everyone was okay, was I need to get a vacuum cleaner and clean this up. There's no electricity, that's not gonna happen, you know. So then it was, okay, well, I just need to close that area off because it's gonna be dark soon and there's broken glass all over the floor. Yeah, and then it was, you know, waiting for her to come home, and then just,
And then waiting for my dad.
yeah.
And that's a time where there weren't, like, we didn't have cell phones.
No,
So you're just waiting to see what was going to happen.
so this is, you know, I'm probably home by 5:30. You didn't get home probably until 7.
Yeah.
At about 9 o'clock, and the phones aren't working. You can't, you know, use the phone at all. But at 9 o'clock, our phone rings. And I answer the phone. It's my mother calling from LA. She says, "Oh my God, you're alive." And I go, "Yeah, how'd you even get through? The phones aren't working." She goes, "I've been dialing nonstop since 5 o'clock. She goes, "But we were watching the news and they showed the Marina District in San Francisco.
In flames.
And that's what they were showing on the news, and then they were saying, and the earthquake was centered in Santa Cruz." So she said, was imagining Santa Cruz didn't exist anymore. I said, "No, we're here. Santa Cruz is here." You know.
It's rubble, but
Yeah, I go, you know, we're fine. The house is fine. The neighborhood is fine. I don't know what.
well, the house. I mean, we had the old spark stove oven, right? 1913.
We had this old oven. It's actually in the Museum of Art and History now.
Oh, really?
But right now it's in
it's in
storage.
storage.
It used to be part of the display.
But the house was probably like a early 20s beach cottage, and this was probably the original stove in the house. It was cast iron, had these spindly metal legs and a stovepipe, and it literally walked across the floor in the earthquake about 3 feet, so that this stovepipe that was vertical was now at about a 45-degree angle, but everything was still connected.
Yeah, that was the strangest thing, that the gas stayed
Yeah.
connected.
There were still a lot of these stoves in town at the time, but I learned after the earthquake that most of them didn't survive the earthquake. And the shaking, the legs snapped, and the weight of the stove they crashed down. But ours.
So the stove walked. We lost all the ceramics that were on the shelves, and we lost our record collection.
Yeah.
Both of us had, pooled our record collection
Right.
when we came together, and the records fell, and the record player fell on top of most of them, and it broke, and they broke. So,
Can I ask what part of town
Yes.
you lived in?
Seabright.
Seabright neighborhood
And I remember that. I don't remember what we ended up
on Camino del
doing.
Sol.
No, Cayuga.
Cayuga.
Don't remember what we did for dinner, if we ate or whatever. But I remember at bedtime.
Well, none of the electricity was
Right.
on for
we
2 weeks.
We put Ben and Andrew in Ben's bedroom, which was, we had like this big window in the front, and I just, we knew enough, okay, you don't want to be around a big window. So we put them in the back bedroom, and there was just like a small window there, and we could drop a shade over it, and so we thought that was pretty safe. They were so shaken. They did not want to be alone in that back bedroom. So we all ended up sleeping in the living room,
Right.
you know, as far away from the big window as we could. But yeah.
Yeah, that was wild.
Yeah, and then I guess the next day, Gail, Andrew's mom, made it into town.
Right.
And she picked up Andrew. And I can't remember if it was the next day or the day after even. One of those days, you know, we're at home now, and I mean, you know, just kind of learning what went on. And it was a warm day like this and sunny. And someone comes and knocks on the door and they go, "There's a gas leak in the neighborhood. You need to evacuate immediately. And you can't drive your car." Because they didn't want anyone turning on an ignition.
Yes.
And we're like, okay. So, you know, what do you, I mean, I grabbed a checkbook and a jacket. And we started walking down the street. We had no idea where we were going. You know, we got, I don't know, 3 or 4 blocks, and a PG&E truck was driving down the street, and we flagged them down to find out what was going on. And they said, "Oh, that's been taken care of. You can go home." Okay.
Yeah, and my folks had gone home the same night back to Capitola, and their house was okay because they didn't experience many things breaking and falling. We were, because of our house was the single wall construction beach cottage, so it rocked in the quake in the same way that the Kresge buildings, which are
The house was
far more substantial, did. But yeah.
Did either of you know the significance of the earthquake when it hit?
No.
Well, to some extent I did, because I was seeing it from up the hill.
And you
So I
drove
could
through
see
a little bit more.
you know, and there were scattered fires from,
Yeah.
you know, whatever
Gas
gas
fires.
explosions had happened. And the downtown was completely engulfed in dust and smoke and whatever. But it was only over the next few days that we started to hear, you know, with the radio, right? Because we don't have cell phones, so there's no internet to speak of at that point. Al Gore hadn't invented it. And so we're gradually learning what's going on. We were walking everywhere, which is easy to do in Santa Cruz anyway, but we were walking, and then we came to learn about the collapse of Bookshop and the loss of the young woman whose name I can't
Ford's
remember
department
anymore.
store.
Right,
That was-
and Ford's and the elder woman that worked there. So, you know, we came to learn of those collapses, and then over the next few days, we're able to get downtown and see what was going on.
Well, and they fenced off downtown.
Mhm.
Maybe 12 square blocks or something
Yeah.
that they fenced off. And
Because they were still doing
And had the
rescue and
National Guard.
recovery. Mhm.
patrolling it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first day or two, you know, people were going into the buildings to get what they could out, but no one had been able to check any of the buildings. And so, you know, the city was,
Right.
we don't know how safe any of this is. So then, you know, the fence went up and the guard came in, but people were still saying, you know, I need to be able to get into my building to
Yeah.
do this, that, or the other. And
And it was your mom actually who was telling, I mean, we could see then in the newspaper started to, you know, tell the story out, but your mom was kind of our informant for how was anybody outside of the region hearing about the quake. And it was so strange to be at the epicenter, but all the story was about San Francisco. And so people were thinking, oh, it was a quake in San Francisco, and not attending to Santa Cruz. And then within a couple of days, Marty Wormhout was mayor, and George H.W. Bush came out and walked the town with her,
yeah.
which was quite an interesting thing for Santa Cruz.
Well, and working at the credit union, we were on the outside of the fence.
Right.
We were on the riverside of Front Street. The fence was on the Pacific Avenue side of Front Street, and I think went to Cedar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it went from like Mission maybe down to, I don't know if it went as far as Laurel or not, but you know, so and it turned out that the building that the credit union was in had it checked and it was fine. It turned out that it was one of the first, if not the first, buildings in Santa Cruz built with steel.
Really?
It had steel I-beam support, so it did fine.
And that original credit union building that you're talking about is now a music store.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but we were back and working, pretty quickly.
Well, the next week, things reopened by the
But,
Monday.
I mean,
because the
still
campus
on the other
reopened.
side of the fence was,
Right.
it looked like a war zone, basically.
Yeah, so many buildings fell.
And eventually, within a week or so, we had, at the time, one of the largest loans we had made was to a business that was on the inside of the fence. And they needed to get their inventory out. And they finally got permission from the city they were going to be allowed 15 minutes to get into the building. So a couple of us volunteered from the credit union and, the owner of the business and some staff, and we had to sign a waiver like this saying if anything happened, you can't sue. And it was a clothing store, so I was like, okay, how are we going to do this in 15 minutes? And someone had the idea of, we got like 3 or 4 giant laundry hampers, and it was like the old TV show Supermarket Sweep. You'd take a laundry hamper and you'd go running through the store and just throw stuff in, and when it was full, you'd turn around. There was a rear portion of the building that I guess they deemed was safer than the rest of the building. So anything we could get into that rear portion, we could have time to deal with once we got it out of the front portion. So you'd run into that rear portion, dump it, and run back. And we actually got all the inventory out of the store in 15 minutes.
Wow.
And this was repeated in a couple of sites because Bookshop pulled all the books out, and back behind the mall we had this tent city of all the businesses that were able to retrieve inventory and go back on market. And the Palomar restaurant set up at what's now the train depot and the soccer fields, and they set up over there and they had an outdoor kitchen. So we all populated the Palomar. I mean, we ate so many, this is not suffering. We ate so many fresh tortillas to keep them in business. And it was fabulous. Like, you go there and you'd watch them making the tortillas and making the food outside on grills, and everybody was eating outside. So it became, out of that, the trauma of all the loss of life and the sort of loss of our habitual dailiness, everything from the Cooper House to the old Pergolesi and the shops and restaurants behind there. There was this coming together of the community around that disaster in the neighborhoods before we could be mobile, and then once we were mobile again and able to move business back to all the parking lots in these giant tents. And Bookshop still has Book Tent Santa Cruz sign posted somewhere in the bookstore, but
Near the restrooms.
yeah, right. Thank you. So that was quite the silver lining to such an extraordinary upturn of our lives.
How did the earthquake impact your life, if it did?
In some really interesting ways. In the first instance, the sort of truing up of who was an ally and who was a challenge in graduate school certainly happened. I mean, it was an unbelievable experience to watch one of the faculty protect herself and have nothing to say about the students. All of us as students became closer by the storytelling of the days and weeks to go. It certainly was one of those moments where everything is put into stark relief and you rethink what's important to you. I felt just such extraordinary gratitude for all of us being safe. It was our son Ben's 7th birthday, so
Turned 7 with a 7.
Yeah, the experience, that experience, and the the ability to sort of turn it and be able to laugh and feel gratitude afterward that we were all fine, that what the birthday to remember was quite something. And then Patrice Vecchione was working as poet in the schools at that time.
Okay.
And so she came together with kids at Galt School, and I don't remember if she was working at other schools as well, but certainly at Galt School, they the teachers and Patrice worked with the kids to write poems about their earthquake experience.
Is it called Fault Lines?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. And so that, they've built that book out of the kids' poetry, and it was a wonderful experience for the kids to feel like they could tell their story and they could bond with each other over their stories. And I think that the community resilience was extraordinary. The sensibility, the sort of the catchphrase now of shop local had so much meaning in that moment for us as a community to make sure. At that time, Santa Cruz was nearly entirely local businesses. So everyone could feel that this was impactful for the community, and the way that we put our support and resources into community businesses to make sure that everyone made it through, and that we made it through to rebuilding, with the exception of Louis Rittenhouse and his real estate games. The community really rebuilt. We came together to rebuild in ways that were really inspiring. So it was a good decade of really feeling that sense of community and community identity and willingness to be together. In the graduate program, we came back together the following week. I think classes were suspended for the rest of that week because it was a Tuesday. So classes were suspended, and then the conversations really ensued about, well, what did this mean, and what was the impact on San Francisco. So we started to get through the newspaper, and once the power came back on through the television news, what was going on in the region. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to think back now and realize, how did that information come to us? Because there was nothing instantaneous.
Right.
So it took time. It took 2 hours before they knew where I was, because it took that long for me to get across town. It took about that long for my dad to get back from Corralitos. So, it was the face-to-face that gave you information, not an instant media connection. It was quite a different time.
Things moved a lot slower.
Yeah.
I think I got a newfound respect for earthquakes. They weren't, they're still fun, but I realized that they can go beyond fun. That was
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that any of the earthquakes I'd been in before anyone had ever died in. And I certainly had never lived through the devastation of one, seeing it. And a lot of the work that we did at the credit union for the next 10 years was about rebuilding
small business
people's lives, people's homes, people's businesses. That was a lot of what we did.
Yeah, and I'd been in Santa Cruz for 11, 12 years at that point, and having grown up in Miami, I'd experienced hurricanes, but and they were all Category 1, not what's happening now with climate change, but you would know it was coming. So the neighborhood would prepare. You would have all your windows covered. You would have collected food and water, so you were able to prepare. And still, it could be intense, and there could be damage.
Right.
Nothing like what they are now, but there would be damage. But you knew it was coming. And the earthquake. This was maybe the third earthquake I'd experienced since I'd been in Santa Cruz, and they were all tiny. Oh, the walls are swaying. Oh, that rattling. So it was quite a stunning difference in experience of what the earth can do.
Do either of you take precautions now against natural disasters after your experience?
Not really. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, it's like, right, both, maybe a little more so when the kids were here, you know, we'd have,
Yeah.
but they're both grown and on their own and out of town, and
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it, but there's not, like, we don't keep water in the garage, and we don't
we did for a while.
We
Yeah.
did. And we
Yeah.
don't have a go bag in the trunk. Things like that we should probably have. And then, and then we think about our neighborhood, and we're on the Prospect Heights side of the highway. So, there are 2 bridges that go out of our neighborhood and one-way street on Brookwood, and we're like, where would we go? Why won't, so we don't really think about it. We probably should. Because we're right, we're on the edge of the green belt, and the golf course is up behind us, so the likelihood of a massive fire is low, but
I don't know.
yeah.
Likelihood
We
of a
don't
fire is
worry.
probably greater than the likelihood of an earthquake. But
I
yeah,
think Jen might have something to say to us about taking precautions, given your background.
No, this isn't about me.
But it's interesting. Probably we're not unusual, that people just are like, whatever, if it happens, it happens. You figure it out. I mean, we've sort of talked, we've done the conversation like, okay, suppose we have to evacuate, what would we grab? The cats if we can, the old family photos on the wall, and our cell phones.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, but, there's food in the house,
Right.
so water. Yeah, who needs water?
Maybe you
There's
can say
wine.
that, I can't. There's wine.
I mean, it's like you got to use what's in the refrigerator first, because you've got
Yeah, we
a
went
day's
there.
worth of cold in there, and
Uh-huh.
so you might. I mean, I think that's what we did the first night of the earthquake. Is whatever was in the refrigerator, we
Oh yeah.
ate.
Well, and the refrigerator we had was a manual defrost, so it actually worked as an ice chest
Yeah.
for a couple of
And
days.
we had a bunch of ice built up in the top of it. So yeah, but
Silver lining.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe-
Ice lining.
Ice lining.
Mhm.
What's it like to reflect on your experience 30 years later?
Mm. Well, it's fascinating.
Where'd
Like
the time
on the
go?
anniversary, we'll be in Wenatchee, Washington, visiting that 7-year-old that was turning 37 on that day, with a child and a life, and so there's the passage of time piece, which is quite stunning. Having lived here all the way through this time period, it's been it's never completely missing from the story of walking downtown, and for many years the last 2 sites to be built on, Rittenhouse and Lau properties, were vivid reminders that we're still not all the way back, and a walk downtown now 30 years later is a walk past a lot of chain stores, brand stores that weren't there 30 years ago. We really, we lost some significant things in the economy of Santa Cruz with the earthquake, because some folks just couldn't afford to come back.
Right.
Even as much as we did our tent city.
yeah, but a lot
retail
came
tent
back.
city.
It's been,
Yeah.
it's been the last 10 or 15 years where a lot of
Where
that.
it's really changed.
Yeah, where, once downtown, because no one came back to downtown for the first 10 years. It took 10 years to rebuild downtown. At first, people didn't want to go downtown because there was no foot traffic. There were no destinations. No one wanted to be the first. So it, slowly came back. And, I recall it was a good 10 years before I felt walking downtown that there was a vibrant downtown again.
Mhm.
And that probably, for another 10 years after that was, a lot of, mostly local businesses, I think, and then, rents and prices started going crazy. And
yeah, it's in a much larger Silicon Valley economy context that it changed so radically.
yeah, and that, now unfortunately, you don't have the number of local businesses there that you used to have, and who knows what would happen if something similar happened again.
And I would say, the moment of the quake, like any kind of natural disaster, brought people together in, very local in the neighborhood. Like, we were conversing with our neighbors. We were all on the street. We were taking our barbecues out on the street and doing what we could together to support each other. And then that, it's like the memory of that fades and people move back into their regular dailynesses and life pressures and whatever. And it doesn't feel like the community has that kind of cohesion anymore around Santa Cruz and writ large across the county. So it's changed that way. Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't covered?
I remember at some point after, it's been years after the earthquake, when we actually hiked to the epicenter in Nicene Marks.
Oh yeah.
Because that's like, you have to do that.
Right. But for a long time we couldn't.
But it's in the middle of this gorgeous forest, and it's such a starkly different experience standing at the epicenter of the earthquake than the memories of downtown immediately after the earthquake. It was, those images have always been kind of juxtaposed in my memory.
Yeah, after the quake, Starhawk, who's an environmental and anti-war activist in San Francisco, said, we shouldn't be surprised Mother Earth shrugged her shoulder. We've just built all these things in precarious ways that were affected by it. And you can see that when you go to the epicenter, and it's just, you're in the forest. It's a spot that's marked because they were able to geolocate it, but the forest is just doing its thing. And we're, on the edges of cliffs and on the, in the floodplain and in the this and that areas that are affected by those natural occurrences, of course. So it's an interesting contrast to sit with.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the old wooden houses like ours, shook, rattled, and rolled, and they were fine, but the kind of
brick,
the early brick and concrete construction that was, built cheap and not to withstand something like that. That's what came down.
Right.
Yeah. But I think most of the houses, other than the ones maybe where the gas lines ruptured and there were fires.
Right. Those were the only ones that went. Some houses slid off foundations, things like that. Yeah. It's
amazing that it was 30 years ago, though. That's like, how'd that happen?
Does it feel a little bit surreal?
To be in your 60s,
yeah,
it's pretty surreal.
Yeah, that 30 years have passed.
It's a funny thing because we don't typically feel our age, but we have 40 years of story in this town as adults, and 30 of those years are together. So when you really start to think like, oh yeah, I remember walking into Book Tent Santa Cruz, and I remember, going over to get the fresh corn tortillas at Palomar, and you're like, yeah, but that was 30 years ago, and Ben was 7.
Our daughter who's 26 and knows nothing about the earthquake or pre-earthquake Santa Cruz. It's just like, oh yeah, you weren't even here then.
Yeah, it's amazing. And the story, of course, the story shifts over time, the meanings that you make of it, the parts you recall. Yeah, it's amazing.
But I mean, it's definitely one of those things that marks Santa Cruz history and someone's history in Santa Cruz. I'm pretty, and you're probably finding this out, everyone who was here then knows exactly where they were at 5:04 on October 17th.
That's right.
So,
That's right. And we've also like photographic histories, we've retold parts of those stories to each other over time, so they've solidified in ways that are probably mutually validating over time. It's fascinating.
yeah, it'll be really
And we
interesting to hear the stories.
Yeah. And tons of gratitude that we were all safe. There were very few injuries in Santa Cruz. And here we are.
Well, thank you both so much for coming here and sharing your story.